My name's David McLaren. I'm here with Doran Ritchie, who is the Resources Manager for the Saugeen Ojibway Nation's Environment Office. And we're just having a conversation about a very interesting meeting that happened last night in Wyerton at the arena. It was the first of many meetings, I guess, Doran, between the park and the Saugeen Ojibway communities?
That's right. For the next 3 years, we'll be having a lot of community engagement meetings.
It was a pretty good crowd there, about, what would you say, about 75 or 80 at the end?
Yeah, people started showing up at 5 o'clock. The doors were open at that point in time, but when we commenced the meeting, we were looking upwards of 80, maybe 100 people, give or take.
And who catered that wonderful meal?
That was Melissa Root from the Saugeen First Nation.
People were lined up sometimes twice for the meal. What was the purpose of the meeting?
So the purpose of the meeting was to initiate community consultation regarding the relationship between Saugeen Ojibway Nation and Parks Canada. So for those community members that don't know, in Saugeen Bruce Peninsula, there are two national parks. It's Bruce Peninsula National Park and Fathom Five Marine Park.
And those parks give us a little history about when they started and what the relationship's been like.
So there were two provincial parks. That was the halfway log dump area and Cypress Lake. Prior to 1987, those were provincial parks. There was a mandate from the federal government to establish two national parks, and I already spoke to those. So in 1987, those parks were established. And the trigger here is Saugeen Ojibway Nation has claimed lands in those areas, and there was no consultation, the development and the creation of the national parks.
So one is gazetted, I understand, and one is not?
Parts are gazetted. So for Bruce Peninsula National Park, the lands are not gazetted. That means fully owned by the federal crown, and to enforce the Parks Canada Act. Fathom Five Marine Park, some of the islands are privately owned, and some of the islands in Fathom 5 are gazetted. The waters are not gazetted.
So those parks may be subject to the land claim?
Correct.
And give us an idea of what the land claim encompasses?
So what the land claim is not about, it's not about taking the lands that are already deeded under the context of Canadian law. What it is about is the return of the lands not sold that are held in trust by the Crown. That's the federal and provincial lands, and some discussion around the municipally owned lands. But
that might include the parklands?
Absolutely.
All right, so there's a chance that the bands will get those parklands back?
Yes.
But there's also the chance that you would come into some sort of negotiation with the park and co-management of the park.
Right. With any land claim, it's not rigid in the sense that, everything in the treaties has to be dismantled and all the lands returned back. I could imagine there'll be some discussion about how that plays out, but negotiation and hopefully potential settlement, as I have a feeling that National Parks is here to stay. They do a lot of good work, I think, in terms of preservation and conservation. But the federal crown has to realize that these lands are, in fact, the traditional territories of the Saugeen. And I think, it would be valid to have a conversation going forward on what that relationship looks like. And I think that's why these negotiations, discussions, contribution agreements on the future of the national parks and the Saugeen Ojibway Nation are so crucial. And that's really why we're reaching out to the communities to engage them at a very full discussion.
So the land under the water around the park, in fact, right around your territories from Goderich in the west to Wasaga Beach in the east, they are also part of the land claim.
That's correct.
So if the land claim is really successful, that means that you would have jurisdiction over the lake beds and the waters above the lake bed.
That's right. Yeah.
Which includes Fathom 5 Park.
Yeah. So there's a second part of that land claim. We just referred to Treaty 72. That is the Saugeen Peninsula, the return of those lands that are held by the Crown. Part 2 of the land claim is specifically what you referred to as the lake bed. So if people want to log into our website, you'll notice there's a map of the traditional territories in the highlighted blue areas that covers the waters. You'll realize that's part of also the title claim as well, and that's the claim to the lake bed.
Yeah, I should just mention that website is www.SaugeenOjibwayNation.ca.
Right.
So what has the relationship been like with the park?
It's been a very interesting relationship, and I will touch briefly on some of the highlights. Last night we did have a more in-depth conversation highlighting some of the key issues, and we spent a bit of time talking about that. The reason being is we want to give the community members a very strong sense of the complexities and the magnitude of work that is involved, that is tasked with the leadership and the technical staff of what's happening in your traditional territories. There's almost 2 million acres. So in short, we had the establishment of the national parks in 1987, again with no consultation. Those discussions between Saugeen Ojibway Nation and Parks Canada commenced in the early 90s. But at the same time, there were other major pressing concerns. We had a charge laid by the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, the fishermen in Nawash. Collectively, the two nations decided to challenge the province on that charge, and they were successful. There were desecration of burial sites in Owen Sound. At that time, Saugeen had a lot of political issues before them. They also signed the Declaration of Duluth. And so that triggered a lot of conversation. And when Saugeen Ojibway Nation won that court case in the early 90s, that really set the precedent for consultation. The federal and the provincial agencies realized that there was a duty to consult, and they needed to take that seriously. Unfortunately, what that meant for your leadership was they were inundated with demands for consultation, and there was a long list of information overload. You had infrastructure and road development, you had wind turbine development, provincial and federal agencies, policies that affect First Nations rights and interests, protection of archaeology site, the fisheries, municipal development, the pending land claim. We also have the world's largest nuclear operating facility right in our doorstep. It's the Bruce Power. More recently, the proposed deep geological repository, aggregate development, and of course, the national parks. So in the 90s, it was a very busy time for SON, and the leadership was scrambling, trying to figure out how to address all these concerns. So it took a few years to figure things out. And in the mid-2000s, there was a direction given from the Joint Council to establish an environment office. And David, I know you were part of establishing that. So that kicked off, I guess the technical arm of the Joint Council is to address the technical growing concerns, to address the demand for consultation. So all that happened in the mid-90s up into the 2005. So fast forwarding to that point, Saugeen Ojibway Nation engaged in 2008 an attempt to negotiate a management plan for Bruce Peninsula National Park. Fathom Five was a different discussion at the time because there is a current fishing agreement in place. SON has inherent rights to that fishery. So in the past, there had been some grave misunderstandings about the national park's role in terms of conservation versus the inherent rights that Saugeen Ojibway Nation fought so very hard for. So we didn't focus in 2008 on Fathom 5, solely focused on Bruce Peninsula National Park. We got through the management plan, but the dispute resolution mechanism, SON strongly opposed that simply for the fact that Bruce Peninsula National Park is not gazetted. Therefore, Saugeen Ojibway Nation felt very strongly about not allowing the federal crown to have jurisdiction in their territory. So based on that, SON rejected that dispute resolution mechanism, and those plans have been, in idle since 2008. The current plans that are in place right now are from 1998, so they're extremely outdated, and there's a very growing need to bring those plans up to date.
Okay.
to address the inefficiencies and move forward.
Right. The parks have not been gazetted, which is simply another word for made official.
Correct.
Because of the land claim. That's outstanding. And so
Yes.
in the management plan that the parks are obliged by their own legislation to put forth, they obviously have to consult with the First Nation. They have the land claim is going to court in April, or at least this spring, I understand.
Correct.
So that means that under the shadow, if you like, of that land claim, these consultations are going to have to happen, and they may take a dramatic turn depending on how the court case comes out. So, but the relationship between people at SON, community members in the park, have the community members, are they allowed, or are not allowed? That's a bad word, but does the park object to them practicing hunting rights, for example, or gathering rights in the park?
I won't touch base on all the specifics, but I can assure you that there has been a very difficult history on understanding the rights, claimed lands, there was an opinion at one point in time from Parks Canada that the rights were not observed and respected. And that's what triggered a very hard, strenuous relationship. Present day, those rights are fully observed, respected. They were reiterated last night from the park superintendent. So Saugeen Ojibway Nation does freely have access to their traditional territory lands, to harvest, to practice ceremony, to access their lands. What that doesn't include, though, however, is camping, but that just provides free access to their traditional territory.
So they can hunt?
Or they can hunt.
Okay, good. Tell me a little bit about what you heard. We were both at that meeting last night in Wyerton, and what did you hear from the community? What kind of message were they delivering to the park as the park struggles to put together its management plan?
I think what I heard overall, and I have to be honest with you, I was prepared just for the worst. I was prepared to hear a lot of past grievances. Certainly there was a strong representation from former councillors and, senior members of Saukiing and Nawash that experienced a lot of that. I was apprised of the discussions around standoffs, law enforcement interactions with community members. But the park acknowledged the fact that there were a lot of past grievances, and there are some reassurances to the community members that those issues are history, that they need to learn presently what the communities feel and think about national parks. So I think the community members are very open and very honest about their feelings towards Parks Canada and their traditional territory. I think the discussion was very constructive. We heard a lot of very positive feedback, but we also heard some very real comments as well about the recognition and moving together in a way that it will and must respect the rights of the Saugeen Ojibway Nation, whether that's hunting, fishing, or access to the lands. Yeah,
one of the things I heard was very strong message to the park that, they've got their own requirements for putting together a management plan, and that consultation is part of that. But the message I heard was that consultation will never be over, and that it's important for the First Nations to make sure that their messages are heard, regardless of the timelines that the park is under.
Yeah, and just to add to that comment too, that was tied to the fisheries. But I just want to be clear to the community members that are, listening in, is that consultation for the national park started in 1987. We're in 2018. And so long as Saugeen Ojibway Nation exists and Parks Canada exists in their territory, consultation will never end. We are consulting on one plan, two plans. We've consulted on federal infrastructure projects. We've consulted on visitor services. We've consulted on law enforcement, fisheries management, wildlife management. Consultation is never going to end so long as both organizations exist. Are there some examples that the park has backed off because you flagged an issue? Absolutely. I'll give an example of consultation for a project, and for security matters, I won't disclose the location, but SON was consulted on a project for a trail development. We went through natural heritage, archaeology, hydrogeology, engineering review. Upon the archaeology assessment, our archaeology staff discovered human remains. That halted the project effectively and immediately. We followed process. The OPP was contacted. They declared that it was not a recent homicide or foul play. So that put it over to the category of repatriation and protocol and burials. Immediately we got in touch with our elders and the knowledge keepers that know how to address those. We conducted ceremony. The project was further delayed. More recently, in the last 2 months, Saugeen Ojibway Nation went through that process, and we defended our rights. We defended the ceremony. We defended the right to protect those ancestral remains. And Saugeen Ojibway Nation declined that project, and Parks Canada adhered to that. So to me, that's a symbol of, that's a sign that the relationship is improving. And going forward, we are looking at every reasonable measure to protect. So the funding for that project was diverted now to build infrastructure, protection measures, and potentially education around that site.
Okay, that's a good sign. Another sign that somebody brought up last night was whether or not the park is hiring First Nations people from these two communities, Nawash and Saugeen, into senior management positions.
Correct.
And they haven't really. I mean, there's a few people who are getting part-time jobs. There's a few others who have full-time jobs, but there's nobody from the communities in senior management.
Well, I mean, I guess if Parks Canada, was in between both communities, and there's roughly 75 kilometers in between both communities, it's an evolving process. I think the conversation of cooperative management is a relatively new term. So to speak of employment, there are a range of different opportunities. There's entry-level positions, there's contract positions, there's seasonal positions, and then there's full-time, and then there's the management positions. So currently, one of the biggest issues for employment that I've heard last night is the geography. It takes time to get to the tip of the peninsula. From Nawash, it's give or take an hour. From the Saukiing community, it's about an hour and 15, hour and 20 minutes. Not a lot of people are drawn to that because of the geographical barrier. But we are working to address that. There have been numerous opportunities over the last few years to increase that number of First Nations presence at any range of position. All positions at Parks Canada are open to anybody. We have reserved positions for SON members. There has been success in there, but it's also been a very learning opportunity because there are a lot of unique needs and issues with First Nations. So we've been working at addressing a lot of those concerns, but at the senior management level, just so people know, the chief park warden is a SON member, and he is in charge of all the wardens at the national parks for both Bruce and Fathom Five. So we do have a senior manager there. The other member from Nawash is the Aboriginal liaison, and that's also a senior member position as well. So right now, as it stands, there are two, and the head carpenter for the assets program at Cypress Lake, he is also a Nawash community member. So the numbers are increasing, and I think what we heard from the community is it needs to either happen faster or we need to put more time and energy into developing senior staff.
One of the intriguing suggestions I heard last night was to engage the youth in the management of the park, and that would mean hands-on, like assessing the biology of an area, for example, going in and actually doing hands-on management with the biologists up there, training these youth, perhaps for taking over some of those jobs, perhaps not. But again, the transportation factor was a problem for getting youth up there and engaged. So the idea was to build or find some facilities for youth to stay in residence, and then work with the park on some of these things. Now, that has, as somebody from Saukiing pointed out, that has really interesting ramifications for mental health and for bringing people perhaps back from the brink of addictions and the rest of it. And every time you connect with the land, that is a step along the good path. So I know that there is some facility at Emmett Lake, but are there any other plans or any other thinking about getting youth up there and engaged with the daily activities of the park? And if not, do you think that's a worthy thing to put into the management plan?
I think what we heard from the community members last night is there's a definite need to explore that even more. We heard a lot of great ideas, some programs that exist right now, both in Saukiing and in Nawash. We need to capitalize on those plans. We need to have those conversations with those managers from both communities to further explore what they're promoting and what they're doing and how that can be infused into the management plans for the national park, because the youth are our future generations. If we're not capturing them now, we are essentially leaving behind something that they need to be informed of today. The youth are going to inherit this long after I'm gone. So it's our job, my job, the community's job, the leadership's job to inform our youth on what they are inheriting. So it's a crucial time to address and bring our young people into these discussions, to provide opportunities, whether it's health and wellness, just being on the land, whether it's providing opportunities for employment to shadow, technical expertise, to follow and shadow our knowledge holders. So specifically at Emmett Lake, we are proposing that is owned by SON 2 facilities. One is a training classroom facility that is completely off the grid, and it's really meant to capture an outdoor experience. And the other facility is a large cooking facility with an open fire pit, and it's an open concept building as well. I'm going to say it's not luxurious in the sense that if you want to spend some time there, it is very much an outdoor experience. There are some basic facilities, a classroom and a cooking open style gazebo with tent pads. There was going to be a ceremony area for sweat lodge. There are areas in close proximity to do fasting. There is a lake that is not permitted any boat access with no motors, so people can go out there and learn a very natural experience. And that is being proposed for next spring, 2019. Currently what the park is doing is they are working with their lead carpenter, and they're hiring 2 community members from each community, so a team of 5 people. Over the winter, they're going to be building those facilities, an indoor facility, and then they're going to be taking that infrastructure and rebuilding it essentially in 2019.
Well, being on the land and walking the land, of course, is an act of sovereignty, an act of reclaiming jurisdiction. So that certainly would help. Another act of sovereignty or act of reclamation, if you like, is the language. As someone pointed out, the language is connected with the land. And I haven't seen a lot of Anishinaabe up at the park. Is that something that you think will find its way into the management plan?
So I'm going to back things up a little bit, and I give a very quick summary of a timeline of what had happened. And trust me, I did intentionally miss a lot of things, but there was a project that was announced to SON back in 2014 called the Federal Infrastructure Projects Program. So Parks Canada was given a few $1 million to upgrade and meet the current demand. So a part of that is signage. we've had a lot of discussions that this is Saugeen territory and it needs to be reflected in the Parks Canada signage and the branding. So we've talked specifically about looking at key areas to reinvigorate the signage and use Anishinaabe in the language, explicitly telling community members and visitors that this is the home of the Saugeen Ojibway Nation territory. This is our language. This is who we are. So those conversations are materialized already, and the action plan for that is implementing that signage, that wording, our logo, our messaging by within the year. So in 2019, the national park will have signage that covers that.
Now, you had mentioned cooperative management, and there's perhaps some confusion between that and co-management. What's the difference?
That is a Parks Canada agency. That's Parks Canada agency language. So what would change the nature from cooperative to co-management is the land claim. And we are going to land claim. And so if Saugeen is successful, what does that look like? If Saugeen is unsuccessful, what does that mean? So cooperative management is going to happen regardless of the land claim. That was a mandate given by the Minister McKenna, last year. So all park lands that intersect with First Nations territory, so all of Canada, will be subject to cooperative management with First Nations. The mechanism, however, for that, change from cooperative to co-management is that if there's a land claim, there could be a potential change of the landowner. And that's when we get into discussions about co-management.
Okay, so it sounds like there's a lot of work ahead. This is the first of how many meetings, do you think?
As many meetings as it takes.
All right.
Yeah. So what we want to do is, after we had the first meeting last night, we've got a lot of work to do between now and the next meeting. But what we want to do is we want to set benchmarks for the community members to make us, that sets a path for the technical office, the leadership, to achieve certain benchmarks, and that maybe every 5-6 months we go back to the communities and report back on what we heard at this past meeting, and then where we've been in the last 5 months. Okay,
very good. It's going to be an interesting process, and it's going to be very interesting to see how the park responds during that process.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, well, thanks, Doran. That's very helpful, and good luck on the next one, and I'm sure that we'll have another podcast on the next one.
Sounds good. Thank you, Dave.
You're welcome.
Yeah, bye.